as requested by Cuttlebone. Cuttlebone? Cuttlebone. As requested by Cuttlebone. A story about a curious snail. Once upon a time, there was a snail named Joe. Joe liked to wander the forest, see the sights, not be eaten by any kind of birds or other predators. And he was a very, very curious snail. Now Joe, though cautious, did tend to get himself into some trouble. One day, at the top of the tallest tree in the forest, he found something yellow and shiny. Or he saw something yellow and shiny. But he was on the ground, and he was a snail. And he knew that climbing trees was dangerous business for snails, because the higher you went, the closer to birds you got. But his curiosity was boundless. This thing shining in the treetop, what could it be? So, Joe slowly made his way to the tallest tree, and at its stump, he looked up, and still he could see that yellow glint at the top of the tree. It had not disappeared. Apparently, it was not a living thing that would have scurried off by now. So, he began to climb. The wood under his snail-like features felt uncomfortable. Unlike most snails, he didn't really like wood. He preferred to be on the ground with leaves and the dirt. But still, his curiosity drove him. It took days just to get to the middle branch of the tree. On that middle branch, he met another snail named Frank. Frank said, "You're a brave snail. What are you doing up here? I thought I'd be the only snail brave enough to go to the halfway point of the tallest tree." "Well," said Joe, "I'm kind of going to the top." Frank was amazed. "The top? You want to go to the top of the tallest tree in the forest? Why, who knows how many birds could be up there? It's mad, I tell you, mad!" Joe knew this, but still, Joe couldn't give up the potential knowledge he could gain from finding out what this shiny yellow object was. "I can't stop now. I've made it to the halfway point, and, well, it would be silly for me to stop now. It would be a wasted effort." Frank just sat there. Do snails sit? We're gonna say yes. And Frank sat, and he thought, and he determined that it was his duty to make sure that Joe would get to the top of the tree safely. "Well, little snail, what's your name?" "My name is Joe, sir. Joe the snail." "Yes, I can see that you're a snail. Anyway, Joe, I will accompany you, and I will make sure that you get to that top of the tree safely. I will admit that I too once dreamed of reaching the top, but after getting this far, I realized it was a fool's journey. But maybe together, two snails can make it." Frank and Joe continued on the journey after that. It was long, and it was slow, them being snails. But eventually they got to the thinnest branches and very near the source of that golden shining light. But they started to notice birds were everywhere. Birds that could easily pick them off the tree and carry them away to their nests and pick them apart for their children. It was truly the scariest thing for a snail. So they were very careful. Slowly, but steadily, they moved from leaf to leaf and hid behind the leaves so the birds could not see them. Being out on the edges of the branches, it was just doable. Finally, they had reached the spot that Joe had seen the shiny yellow object. Joe went out onto the branch where it gleamed, while Frank stayed behind and was a lookout. Joe slowly moved and eventually saw it. A round object, very thin, but of a brilliant yellow. But it was in a nest. A bird's nest. There were no birds about, so maybe Joe could get to the shiny object quick enough before the bird came back and threatened to eat him. So, as fast as his little snail slime could carry him, Joe rushed towards the nest, rushed towards the curious, shiny yellow object. He reached the nest, and then he heard it. Caw! Caw! A bird swooped down and landed on the nest. "What are you doing? What are you doing near my nest? You go away or I shall eat you, snail!" Joe was confused. Why was he being threatened? It was a bird. Wouldn't the bird just eat him? No questions asked? I'm sorry, but please don't eat me. Please don't eat me. The bird looked down at Joe and studied him a minute. "Well, I don't want to eat you. I'll only eat you if you come in and invade my nest. This is my home. I don't eat snails, I eat berries. Why would I eat you? Why would I eat you?" Joe looked up at the bird, confused. "But don't all birds eat snails?" The bird laughed in a strange bird laugh. "No, we eat all sorts of things. Some people I know eat snails. I think it's preposterous. Why would someone want to eat something that's, like, living? No, it's berries for me." Joe was very relieved. But he looked down and saw the shiny thing again. I'm sorry. I was just attracted by this." He pointed with his head at the shiny. "Oh, that? Yeah, that's pretty cool, isn't it? I found that in the forest on a place that was really flat. I don't know what it is, but it's pretty." Joe nodded his head. "It is pretty. But I'm sorry. I was going to take it from you, thinking that you were an evil bird, but you're not an evil bird at all. You're a nice bird." The bird once again laughed. "I glamorous bird, aren't I? I tell you what, I bet for a snail it's pretty hard to get down from here. How about I take you in my talons and I give you a lift back down to the ground? Joe looked up at the bird. Oh, that would be so great. It's been a very hard trip up here. Can I maybe come and visit and see the shiny thing again sometime? The bird smiled. Of course you can. You just come down to this tree again and I'll lift you up and bring you to the shiny thing. It's so pretty, I figure, yeah, we might as well share it. Joe was enthralled. The bird, true to his word, picked up Joe and carried him back down to the forest floor. Frank was left in the tree, and Frank was watching. Frank didn't like birds. He didn't care that this bird wouldn't eat snails. No, birds were terrible creatures. So, while the bird was away carrying off Joe, Frank inched his way towards the nest. Frank picked up the coin. It was a coin, of course. And he carried it with him quickly as he could away from the nest. And he tossed it off the tree, hoping that it would be buried in the ground below. But another bird, a friend of the first bird, saw what Frank was doing. It swooped over and it picked up the coin and it dropped it back in the first bird's nest.
What are you doing? That is not your coin.
Frank was startled. He didn't know what to do. He had been caught.
That's very bad. You should be ashamed of yourself.
Frank realized that he wasn't going to be hurt, so he laughed at the bird.
What would a bird know about ownership? This whole forest used to be mine. I used to be king. King of the snails and king of the forest. What is yours is mine, and what's mine is mine.
At that, Frank turned his snail back to the bird and started snailing off. The bird, not being a herbivore like the first, realized he was very justified in taking a snack with him back to his home for his children. And so he swooped in and grabbed up Frank.
What are you doing? What are you doing? You wouldn't. You wouldn't. You wouldn't!
And Frank was never seen of again. Joe and the first bird became very close friends. And Joe, being friends with the first bird, started making friends with other birds. Some that did eat snails, but were sure to make sure that Joe and his friends were never eaten. And they all lived happily ever after, except for the jerk Frank. The end.